No one should have been out in that storm, not even him, not after everything he'd lost. But just past midnight, in the white roar of Estes Park's deadliest blizzard, Griffin Hale heard it, a sound that didn't belong to wind or memory, a stumble, a cry, and two shadows at his gate, bone-thin, wild, and trembling. They didn't run, they didn't fight, they just looked at him, not as a man, not as a threat, but as a final chance to survive. What he did next would thaw something far colder than snow. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. Estes Park, Colorado, where the Rockies claw the sky and silence falls with the snow. At 8,000 feet above sea level, winter doesn't arrive quietly, it storms in, teeth bared. That night, the blizzard was a beast, pounding the mountains with gusts like fists and hurling snow sideways across the ridgelines. Most folks in town had long shuttered their windows and stoked their hearths. But not Griffin Hale. Griffin lived alone in a weather-beaten cabin at the tree line's edge, 100 yards off a trail no one used since the fire roads closed. He was 45, tall, broad-shouldered, with gray beginning to streak the dark brown of his hair. His beard was thick, more out of habit than style. There was a slowness in how he moved, deliberate, like a man who measured the weight of every step. His eyes were dark green, quiet but heavy, like a man who had seen too much and said too little. Once Griffin had been a firefighter, wildland crew engine captain, 13 years in the worst hells of the West. Then came that blaze near Boulder, a wind shift, a wrong call, 2 men buried in flame. Since that night, Griffin hadn't worked another job, hadn't stayed long in one town. Estes Park was supposed to be temporary, just a winter of hiding. But winter stayed, and so did he. The wind screamed outside, rattling the cabin walls. Inside, the fire was steady, casting amber across the pinewood floor. Boone, Griffin's old border collie, lay curled near the stove. Boone was 11, mostly black with a graying muzzle and eyes that missed nothing. He was the kind of dog who didn't bark unless it mattered, and when he lifted his head at 12:04 a.m., Griffin noticed. Then came the sound. Not the wind, not a falling branch, something else, a thud, a dragging noise. Then a faint whimper. Not human, not wolf, something between. Griffin stood, pulled on his heavy coat, and reached for the lantern. He opened the door. Cold slammed into him like a wave. The snow was knee-deep, the wind slicing his face. But through the white veil, just beyond the old wooden gate, 2 figures stood, barely upright. Horses. Wild ones. One was taller, a mare, dusty chestnut though her coat was crusted in frost. Her ribs showed through and her head hung low. The other, a smaller figure beside her, was clearly a yearling. Spindly legs trembling, left foreleg twisted at a brutal angle. Both animals stood motionless, their bodies shivering violently, steam rising from flared nostrils. They weren't running, they weren't wild with fear. They were waiting. Griffin stepped forward, boots crunching in the drift. The mare didn't move, only shifted slightly to keep herself between the man and the injured foal. Her eyes met his, not fierce, not defiant, but exhausted. Pleading. He stopped at the gate, one hand resting on the latch. Every instinct, every survival rule he'd followed since the fire screamed to turn away. Don't get involved. Let the wild be wild. But something about those eyes. Griffin lifted the latch. The gate creaked open. The mare didn't bolt. She stepped back once, then stilled again. "All right," he muttered. "Come on then." It wasn't a barn he led them to, just a lean-to he'd repaired in autumn, meant for firewood and maybe a gear sled. It was sheltered on 3 sides, bedded with old straw. He grabbed 2 armfuls of dry hay from storage and spread it inside, then brought out a water bucket. The mare moved cautiously, finally stepping into the shelter. She nudged the foal forward, who stumbled once hard and nearly collapsed. Boone stood nearby, silent as ever, watching. Inside, Griffin knelt by the foal. His hands, though calloused, were gentle. He felt the leg, swollen, not broken, but badly sprained. "You're lucky," he whispered. "Could have lost that leg in a fall." He fetched his old first aid bag, the one from his crew days. Wrapped the leg in gauze, patted it with cloth. As he worked, the mare stood sentinel, ears flicking at every wind gust. He named her Solace. Not out loud, but in his mind. She had that presence, quiet, wounded, watchful, like a mother who'd carried too much for too long. And the foal? Cypress, for the tree that could survive drought, fire, and wind. Griffin didn't sleep much that night. He sat by the stove, sipping lukewarm coffee, Boone at his feet. His mind wandered where he usually didn't let it. Back to the canyon fire, to Fletcher and Diaz, to the last words on the radio before the line went silent. But every time the memory came too close, Griffin stood, put on his coat, and stepped outside to check the horses. Each time, Solace watched him, and Cypress breathed slow under the blanket. They were still alive, and somehow, so was he. Morning came pale and brittle. The blizzard had passed, leaving the world white and sharp as crystal. As the sun rose pink and gold behind the peaks, Griffin stood at the lean-to. Cypress tried to stand, fell, tried again. Solace nuzzled him, then braced her body to help. Griffin felt something swell in his chest. Grief, maybe? Or its twin brother, hope. He fetched warm oats, added molasses. Breakfast, he told them, placing it gently. Boone followed, then sat, ever the quiet guardian. The wind was calmer now, but inside Griffin something had begun to stir again. Something not frozen, not forgotten, just waiting for the storm to end. The storm had passed, but the world outside Griffin Hale's cabin was still breathless with cold. The ridges around Estes Park were glazed in white. Icicles like daggers hung from the eaves, and the snow crackled underfoot with every step. Inside the lean-to, the two wild horses had survived the night. Barely, but they had. Griffin moved early, long before the sun could warm anything. He knelt beside Cypress. The yearling still lay curled beside Solace, his injured leg tucked awkwardly beneath him. The swelling had worsened overnight, but there was no sign of infection yet. Griffin rummaged through the olive-drab canvas duffel he'd carried through 12 fire seasons. It was half empty now. Bandages, iodine, some wound powder. He hadn't expected to ever use it again. Certainly not for a Mustang. He cleaned the leg carefully. Cypress flinched but didn't pull away. Solace stood watch as always, her breath rising in soft clouds, her body a barrier between her foal and the world. She didn't lash out or bolt, but her eyes followed every movement Griffin made. He murmured soft nothings as he worked. Not because the horses would understand, but because the silence was too sharp without them. "You're all right, kid," he said gently. "We'll get you through this." Boone patted over his paws silent on the straw and sat beside the gate. His ears twitched, head cocked, but he made no sound. At 11, Boone no longer chased rabbits or barked at shadows. His days of action were gone, but his intuition was sharper than ever. And now, for the first time, Griffin noticed Boone inching closer to the foal, nose sniffing cautiously. Solace didn't react. Cypress gave a soft snort, not fear, more like acknowledgement. That moment, quiet and unremarkable, stirred something in Griffin. Boone had never tolerated animals, not since the day they pulled him from that burning truck beside Griffin. Both singed, both half dead. Something about the chaos had broken part of him too. But now he lay beside Cypress, not as a watchdog, but as a companion. Griffin rose, fetched a pot, and made oatmeal on the wood stove. Not the instant kind, real oats, boiled slow with a pinch of salt and molasses. He added a touch of crushed apple and let it steam. It wasn't horse feed, but it was better than nothing. He placed the bowls near the stall. Solace nudged Cypress, who stood gingerly, favoring the wrapped leg, but managed a few steps. Griffin watched, not moving as both horses ate in silence. That afternoon, he rebuilt part of the shelter. He replaced a broken beam with timber he'd stored for firewood, hammered nails with slow, measured strikes. He worked in layers, 2 flannel shirts under an old canvas coat, and every breath he took left frost on the air. Later, as the sun slipped behind the ridge, Griffin did something he hadn't done in years. He sat at his kitchen table, wiped the dust from an old spiral-bound notebook, and began to write. The first sentence came out stiff. "The storm broke last night. 2 Mustangs at my gate. I opened it." Then more followed. He wrote about Cypress's limp, Solace's stillness, the way Boone had laid down beside them. The fire crackled beside him. And in that tiny act, pen scratching paper, Griffin felt himself return to a world he had once loved. A world of stories and things that mattered. 3 days passed. Each morning, he changed Cypress's wrap, massaged the leg, and tested its flexibility. The foal flinched less each time. Boone became a constant presence in the stall, lying in a corner, watching the horses with mild curiosity. On the 4th day, someone knocked. The sound nearly stopped Griffin's heart. He hadn't heard a knock in months, maybe longer. He moved cautiously to the door and opened it just a crack. Standing outside was a woman, bundled in a thick brown parka, snow up to her calves. She looked to be in her early 30s, with sun-chapped cheeks, dark hair tied in a low braid, and eyes the color of rain-polished gravel, sharp, searching. She held a walking stick and carried a leather-bound field journal, clipped shut with a pencil. "Sorry to bother you," she said, brushing snow from her sleeves. "I'm Dr. Maren Whitlock. I'm tracking 2 missing Mustangs. Saw fresh trail signs nearby and followed them." Griffin didn't answer immediately. He studied her, height just under 6 feet, lean build, face hardened by weather and persistence. There was no hesitation in her voice, but neither arrogance nor entitlement. "Biologist?" he asked finally. "Veterinarian," she corrected. "Specialize in equine rehabilitation." These 2 were part of a small satellite herd near Storm Mountain. They vanished during the last snow front. He stepped aside and gestured toward the lean-to. Maren crossed the threshold, careful not to slip. When she saw Solace and Cypress, her expression shifted from resolve to relief. She knelt slowly, letting the journal drop beside her, and observed from a distance. "That's the yearling," she murmured. "We call him Cypress in our log. And the mare, that's Solace. She's protective, smart. We weren't sure they survived." "They did," Griffin said. "Barely." Maren nodded, eyes scanning the wrap on Cypress's leg. "You did that?" He nodded once. "It's not bad," she said. "Swelling's down. No bone involvement, looks like." She reached slowly into her coat and offered Solace a dried carrot. The mare sniffed, took it, and stepped back. They stood in silence for a moment. "Do you plan to keep them?" Maren asked gently. "No," Griffin replied. "Just helping them get through." She smiled faintly. "Same reason I'm here." They talked more inside, over hot tea and a shared tin of sardines. Maren explained that her field team was camped 2 miles down the valley, but the snow had cut them off from vehicle access. She hoped to find the horses and bring them back for recovery before attempting reintroduction. Griffin glanced out the window. The wind was picking up again. "You've got time," he said. "Storm's coming back." That night, he made up a cot near the fire. Maren slept there, boots lined by the stove, coat tucked beneath her head. Boone watched from the rug. And outside, Solace and Cypress huddled together, snow falling gently on the roof. Griffin didn't sleep much. He wrote again. This time, his final line read, "She knocked." The horses aren't the only ones learning to trust again. By the time the storm had softened into a hush of falling flakes, the morning light turned everything to crystal. Griffin Hale stood on his porch, coffee cooling in his calloused hand. Boone at his side, tail still, nose twitching. The snowfall had blanketed everything in a soft, deceptive silence. But silence could lie. And Boone, ever the sentry, had started growling low and steady, eyes fixed on the distant fence line. That's when Griffin saw them. Boot prints, deep and fresh in the snow, heading toward the trees. Not from town, not from hunters. Someone had walked in, alone. Griffin grabbed his coat and rifle, habit more than necessity, and followed the trail. Boone trotted close behind, ears perked, head low. The air stung, crisp and metallic, the kind of cold that burns nostrils and settles into your bones. The prints curved toward the east slope, and after 15 minutes of trudging, Griffin found her. She was crouched beside an older model red pickup half buried in snow, the driver's side door cracked open. Her body was shaking, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Griffin slowed, stepping into view. "You okay?" he called out. She stood quickly, blinking through her fogged glasses. Her parka was soaked to the waist, hair plastered to her cheeks, braid undone in places. Tall, wiry frame, cheeks raw from wind, eyes rimmed in red but still sharp, still observant. "I'm Dr. Maren Whitlock," she said, pulling off one glove to offer her hand. "I'm tracking 2 missing Mustangs. I think they're close." Griffin nodded, lowering his rifle. "They're with me. Come on, it's not far." Maren hesitated, clearly gauging the man. She saw a tall, broad figure with weather-worn features and cautious eyes, but something in his tone, quiet, certain, made her trust him. Back at the cabin, Solace lifted her head as they entered the lean-to. When she saw Maren, her ears twitched, and she stepped forward, slowly but without fear. Maren dropped to her knees in the straw and exhaled. "You made it," she whispered, touching Solace's muzzle. "I knew you would." Boone watched from the entrance. Cypress lay nearby, bandaged legs stretched out. Maren scanned the wrap job and nodded in approval. "You did this?" "Best I could with what I had," Griffin said. She smiled. "It's good work." Inside the cabin, Griffin stoked the fire while Marin peeled off her outer layers. She wore thick thermal pants, a navy wool sweater, and boots caked in slush. Her skin was pale with fatigue, but she moved with a practiced steadiness. She accepted coffee without asking, sipped it slowly, eyes always drifting back to the stall window. Griffin noticed the small patch sewn onto her parka, Northern Equine Research Initiative. He knew the name. They studied herd dynamics, migration, and had pushed back on government roundups in Utah last fall. "How long have you been looking?" he asked. 6 days, she said. "Storm set us back. The herd scattered near Storm Mountain. These two were last seen limping behind." She paused, rubbing her hands together. "I thought they didn't make it. Most wouldn't have." Griffin poured more coffee into her mug. "They got lucky, or maybe stubborn." Marin's face softened. "That's solace for you." The conversation turned practical. Marin explained that her team was still camped about 2 miles down the canyon. Their trailer was snowed in. No way to get the truck up the slope, not with the roads iced over. Griffin thought for a moment, then stood and walked to the back of the cabin. When he returned, he was dragging a dusty blue tarp off an old machine, half buried under canvas and time. "Charlie," he said, "snowmobile." "She still runs, barely. Might be enough to pull a sled." Marin raised an eyebrow. "You're serious? I can weld a harness, rig something flat for transport. If we don't move soon, that colt's leg won't hold much longer." She stared at him, visibly weighing risk and reason, but he saw the spark light in her eyes. She was the kind who didn't say no to a good challenge, especially one involving wild horses. That night, they got to work. Griffin scavenged planks and spare rope. Marin laid out medical supplies, compress wraps, salve, pain relievers. Boone watched it all from the threshold, shifting only when sparks flew from the workbench. As they worked, Marin began to talk, not about logistics but about Ren. "He was the first Mustang I ever tracked," she said, adjusting a strap. "Black gelding, fierce as hell, took 6 months to earn his trust. But he led me straight into a ravine once, half-dead foal trapped in the snow. He stood over that baby like it was his own, protected it till I got there." She paused. "People think it's just instinct, but it's not. It's loyalty. Loyalty most humans don't even show each other." Griffin didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. Later, as the fire wound down and the final sled bolts were tightened, they sat on opposite sides of the room. Boone lay between them, head resting on his paws. "You always live alone?" Marin asked softly. "Not always," Griffin replied, "but long enough to get good at it." She didn't press, didn't pry. Just gave him the kind of silence that felt like an invitation, not a void. In the lean-to, Cypress shifted and let out a low whinny. Solace answered with a deep rumble from her chest, then settled again. Tomorrow they'd set out. 2 people, 2 Mustangs, 1 snowmobile named Charlie, and something else. Something unspoken. Trust beginning to thaw. The stars had not yet faded when Griffin Hale stepped out into the pre-dawn dark, breath pluming like smoke. The wind had calmed overnight, a deceitful hush settling over the high ridges above Estes Park. But Griffin knew better. In the Rockies, stillness often meant a storm was gathering its breath. Charlie, the old snowmobile, was idling beside the cabin, coughing out gray exhaust. Behind it, a makeshift sled cobbled together from plywood, rope, and sections of a broken fence was padded with blankets and burlap sacks. It wasn't elegant, but it was steady. Solace and Cypress stood near it, ropes gently looped to their halters, their bodies cloaked in old army blankets. Boone circled the sled, occasionally pausing to sniff the air, tail twitching low, alert. Marin emerged next, fastening the final buckle on her backpack. She was dressed in layered thermals and a thick brown canvas coat, hood up, braid pinned tight to her collar. Her face was pale but resolute, with a red mark on her cheek from where she'd slept against the rough wood wall. "You sure it'll hold?" she asked, nodding to the sled. Griffin gave it a shove with his boot. "It'll hold." They loaded supplies, feed pellets, first aid kits, thermoses of broth, extra blankets, into a crate strapped at the front of the sled. Marin checked Cypress's leg one final time. The swelling had gone down, and he was bearing more weight, but not enough to walk 2 miles through snowdrifts. Solace didn't need coaxing. She followed Griffin with calm, steady steps, head low, but not fearful. She had become the quiet heartbeat of their small group, watchful, patient, anchored in her devotion to the full. They departed at first light, the the sky a deep blue bruised by gray along the edges. Charlie growled to life and tugged the sled forward with a lurch. Griffin drove while Marin walked ahead, guiding the way with a long wooden pole, testing snow depth and probing for hidden rocks. The journey was slow. Wind swept down from the peaks in bursts, lifting snow into shimmering veils that blurred the trail. More than once, Charlie stuttered on hidden ice or threatened to tilt when the sled caught on an uneven drift. Griffin adjusted his weight, muscles aching from the strain of keeping balance. At one point, Cypress whinnied sharply when the sled hit a buried root. The jolt knocked loose one of the side supports. Griffin stopped the engine and dropped to his knees, fingers red with cold as he lashed the support beam back into place. Marin stood over him, shielding his hands with her own gloved ones. "You're doing everything right," she said. "But if the storm catches us up here?" "It won't," Griffin muttered, jaw clenched. "We'll make it." By midday, snow began to fall again. Not a blizzard yet, but enough to sting the eyes and bury the trail. The sky darkened unnaturally fast, and Griffin knew they needed shelter. He remembered an old game trail about a quarter-mile north, a shallow overhang where he once sat out a lightning storm years ago. He pointed toward it and led them through the trees, snow crunching beneath the sled, branches brushing their shoulders like ghostly hands. They reached the rock outcropping just as the storm arrived. Snow swirled in wild sheets and the temperature plummeted. Griffin killed the engine and helped Marin unhitch the horses. The rock wall provided partial cover from the wind, and the floor was mostly dry beneath a sloping ceiling of stone. Marin helped lay out sleeping pads and tucked the horses close together against the wind. Cypress leaned against Solace, legs folded beneath him. Boone nestled beside them, his fur fluffed thick with static and snowflakes. Griffin built a small fire with dry twigs and pine he'd stored in his pack. The flame flickered weakly at first, but slowly grew, casting a warm golden glow across the stone. They huddled near it, Marin pressing her hands close. Her gloves were off, and her fingers were chapped and raw. Griffin pulled a tin of salve from his bag and handed it to her without a word. She smiled faintly and rubbed it on. For a while, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the whistle of wind outside. Then Marin spoke. "You said you used to work the fire lines?" Griffin nodded. "Engine captain, 14 years. What made you stop?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a silver medallion, round and weathered, strung on a broken leather cord. The engraving was worn nearly smooth. He held it out. "Belonged to Diaz, one of my crew. He died saving me." Marin took the medallion gently, her fingers brushing his. She read the faint letters on the back. "Hold the line." "I used to carry it every day," he said, "until I stopped believing I was worth saving." Boone stirred beside them but didn't move. The fire snapped again, sending sparks into the air. "I've never told anyone that," Griffin said. "Not even Boone." Marin didn't reply. Instead, she handed the medallion back and simply said, "He would have wanted you to keep carrying it." Griffin tucked it into his coat again and looked away. But something had loosened in his chest, a tight knot that had been there for years. Outside, the storm howled and raged, but inside there was warmth and breath and company. That night, they didn't sleep much. Marin took first watch, her eyes scanning the swirling darkness outside. Griffin dozed beside the fire, hand on Boone's back. And as Cypress stirred in his sleep, letting out a soft, dreamlike snort, Solace lowered her head and pressed her muzzle gently against his side. It wasn't just survival anymore, it was hope. Fragile, flickering, but alive. Dawn arrived slow and golden, bleeding light over the jagged ridgelines of Estes Park. Snow clung to the branches like sugar, and the air had softened from sharp to crisp. The storm had broken. The worst was behind them. Griffin Hale rose first. The fire had gone to coals, but warmth still lingered under the rocky overhang. Boone stirred beside him, stretching his long legs with a grunt and shaking snow from his fur. Near the sled, Cypress lay curled tightly against Solace, his breathing steady. The swelling in his leg had receded more. He was putting more weight on it now, hesitant but steady. Marin emerged next, rubbing sleep from her eyes, face drawn but bright. She stood at the cave mouth, arms folded, watching the early sun scatter over the trail. "We move now," Griffin said. She nodded. "They're waiting." They hitched Solace and Cypress again, gently, keeping the wraps tight. Griffin gave them each a rub-down with warm cloths while Marin checked vitals and balance. They loaded the sled light this time, just the blankets and one water flask. Boone rode up front again, ears up, gaze fixed. The trail to the clearing was clearer than expected. Wind had blown away much of the powder, revealing old fire roads etched in ice and gravel. After nearly an hour of slow travel, the trees thinned. Then, like curtains drawn back, the land opened. The clearing sat at the base of the slope, wide, sunlit, and surrounded by pine. A line of transport trucks waited near the edge, engines humming low, exhaust pluming like ghost breath into the chill air. A woman in a forest green parka jogged toward them, hand raised. Short, mid-50s, silver curls escaping from beneath a knit beanie. Her name was Janine Ellis, field supervisor for the Mustang study. Her face lit with relief. "You found them," she breathed, rushing to Cypress's side. "Oh God, you found them." She crouched beside him, stroking his muzzle. "Hey, little fireheart, you made it." Janine was sharp and maternal, the kind who remembered details, what each horse preferred, what time each storm rolled in. Marin introduced Griffin with a nod. "He's the one who kept them alive," she said. Janine stood and shook his hand firmly. "We owe you more than you know." Volunteers stepped in, 2 young men and a woman. The men, Noah and Eli, were students from the University of Colorado, both lean, mid-20s that dressed in park-issued windbreakers. They moved gently but efficiently, using a sling to support Cypress and ease him onto a padded ramp. The woman, Tasha, dark-skinned and soft-spoken, soothed Solace with a rhythmic whisper as she loaded her. As the doors of the trailer closed, Cypress turned his head. For one brief moment, his eyes locked on Griffin. He let out a soft whinny, not loud, not fearful, just a note of recognition. Then he turned away, following Solace into the dark of the trailer. Griffin stood still as the engines started. Boone sat beside him, ears flicking forward, tail thumping once. Marin touched his shoulder. "They'll be okay," she said. "I know," he replied. "I just didn't expect it to hit this hard." 2 weeks passed. The snow melted slowly in Estes Park. The trails turned to mud and slush, and birds returned in spurts singing into the thaw. Griffin kept to himself, chopping wood, writing more in the notebook he'd once left buried in dust. Boone limped a little now, old injury flaring up in the cold, but he followed Griffin wherever he went. Then the letter came. The envelope was pale blue, stamped with the Nary logo. Inside, a folded letter and 3 glossy photographs. One photo showed Solace in a wide corral, her coat gleaming, muscles lean and healthy. Another showed Cypress mid-gallop, leg braced but strong, eyes wide with fire. The third was of both Mustangs nuzzling nose to nose beneath a cottonwood tree. Griffin unfolded the letter. "Griffin, they're ready. The herd is nearby and Cypress is running again. We've chosen a release site near Echo Ridge, a safe, familiar range. I know this isn't your usual crowd, but we'd be honored if you joined us for the release. Not just because you saved them, because I think they saved you too. Come if you can." Marin Griffin read it twice, then tucked the photos into the journal. That weekend, he and Boone drove his rusted Ford pickup south along the foothills. The road curled through highland meadows and ridges flushed with spring melt. At the top of Echo Ridge, a handful of trucks were parked on the gravel turnout. Griffin stepped out slowly, eyes adjusting to the brightness. Boone leapt down beside him. In the clearing below, Solace and Cypress stood with a third horse, a young stallion named Arrow, newly integrated into their recovery herd. Arrow was deep black with a jagged white blaze down his nose. Strong and cautious, he kept to Solace's right side, flank brushing hers. Marin stood waiting, wind whipping her braid around her scarf. She looked different now, looser somehow, less guarded. When she saw Griffin, she smiled and waved him forward. "We'll open the gate together," she said. Janine and the others gave space. Griffin reached for the latch. The gate swung wide. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Solace stepped forward, Cypress close behind. Arrow brought up the rear, ears high. They moved as one, not rushed but determined. Into the open field they ran, 3 shadows slicing the sunlight, hooves thundering against thawed earth. Solace reared briefly, Cypress kicking up his heels beside her. Arrow whinnied once, and the hills echoed in response. Griffin stood silent, watching until they were just dust and distance. Marin handed him a folded note. "Not just the horses were saved. Thank you for stepping out of the storm. Thank you for letting someone in." Back at the truck, Boone jumped into the passenger seat. Griffin didn't speak. He only looked out across the ridgeline, where 3 specks vanished into the trees. And for the first time in years, the wind on the mountain wasn't empty. It was peaceful. Sometimes the path back to ourselves begins with a simple act of compassion. Griffin opened a gate for 2 freezing Mustangs, but in doing so, he opened a door inside himself. Healing doesn't always roar like thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, in shared silence, in steady footsteps, in the warmth of trust. Whether it's an animal, a stranger, or a forgotten part of who we were, choosing to care can change everything. In daily life, we all face storms, grief, regret, loneliness. But just like Griffin, we can choose to reach out, to shelter something vulnerable, and in doing so, rediscover our own strength. You never know who or what you might save when you step outside yourself. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave us a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful tales like this one.